Teachers, what was the best smart butt response from a student you have heard? Viewer edition.
I love smart buttery. So fun story for me on this one. It's actually the best response from a teacher to a student, as I was in Algebra 2, and my teacher, Mr. H. Very, very funny teacher. We had a good rapport, and we could, joke, back and forth or whatever. And I can't remember what he said, but we were talking, and he made a real smart butt response. And so, the whole class kind of laughed along with him, and I just shook my head and went, smart butt. To which he just stared at me and went, better to be a smart butt than a dumb butt. Obviously, we didn't use the word butt, but it was pretty great. I respected him a lot. Story 1. I remember back in elementary school, I needed to go to the bathroom while 2 of my female teachers were talking. I walked up to them and asked politely if I could leave as I needed to pee. Older teacher ignored me and told the younger one, see, that's how you know they're lying when they cross their legs like that. So I peed in her trash can in front of the entire class for what must have been 4 solid minutes. I needed to go about 2 hours prior. I was given detention, and my father was called. He came a few hours later and asked why I was in detention. She tells him that I peed in her trash can, and I clarified that I asked them, that she called me a liar and then ignored me. He looked into the half-filled trash can of pee, then back to the teacher, walked over to it, dumps it out on the floor by her desk, turns back to her and says, he wasn't lying, you bee. Swore at her in at least 3 different languages and said if she ever pulled that kind of negligent crap again, he'd see that she is fired. I had to say prompts to you and your dad, though, folks, I would advise against this one just because if you're going to pee in a trash can, you're going to be exposing yourself in public, which that can get you in trouble that you don't want or deserve. But I still agree, and I despise any teacher who doesn't allow students to go to the bathroom or is really weirdly strict with that crap. Screw off, teachers. If a kid says they want to go to the bathroom, you let them go to the bathroom. Prisons let people go to the bathroom, for God's sake. Story 2. Kinda flipping the situation here, but I remember in 7th grade math when we were once crafting a hypothetical scenario with a coin flip. We were talking about how it landed on heads or tails was each a 50% chance, to which I promptly responded, couldn't it technically land on its side too? The teacher didn't really care and barely even gave any acknowledgement, but people proceeded to joke about what I said for the rest of that class without making fun of me for it. That's one of my proudest moments.
Story 3. I'm not sure if this counts, but in my chemistry class, we were learning about ionic bonds and valence electrons. We had this practice where we'd get assigned an element with 1, 2, 6, or 7 valence electrons, and we had to find someone with the amount our element needed to become stable. After the teacher finished explaining the instructions, I raised my hand and said, "So you're asking us to do a bonding exercise?" He just stopped, sighed, then he told me that he was going to use that joke in the future. Stupid science puns almost always elicit a reaction. I'm just glad this one wasn't combustion. I really don't want anyone blowing up on me. Story 4. The male teacher and a girl going to the loo reminds me of a story. We had a male sub, and one of the girls in my class asked to go to the toilet, also known as a loo for some people who are confused. Anyway, the sub says yes, but then we all hear a rapper. He then says to the girl, look, if you're going to eat in here, you can do that, but you have to share with the whole class. She then whips out a tampon, throws it to his face, and says, you want some?
Teachers, you gotta stop being so reactionary with this stuff, because it only is gonna make you look like a dingus in the end. A girl asked you if she could go to the bathroom and you heard crinkling and you couldn't stop for just 1 second to think, maybe it's not candy or food. You had to immediately jump in like that and look where it got you.
Story 5. I remember in middle school, I had a young teacher that was new to teaching and thus was on a bit of a power trip. She'd like to give out detentions for any little thing she could. I inevitably got detention along with a huge chunk of my class one day. When we showed up for detention, she told us the rules of detention, saying, "This is detention. You will sit with your eyes in front and you will not speak whatsoever," emphasizing the no speaking part. She then sat at her desk and about 2 minutes later asked us, "So did everyone have a good weekend?" My classmates nodded and murmured in agreement, then fell silent immediately. I didn't react whatsoever and just ignored her question. When she noticed I didn't respond, she asked me specifically, "What about you? Did you have a good weekend?" I just stared at her and didn't answer. She responded with, "No, okay." Then another minute later, she said to me in front of everyone, "You know, it's polite if someone asks you a question, you respond." To which I broke my silence with, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought this was detention and we weren't supposed to speak whatsoever." What's funnier is, I wasn't trying to be smart about it. That was my honest answer because I thought she was testing me and trying to get an excuse to tack on another detention since she was on a power trip. It wasn't until after detention, when my classmates gave me kudos, that I realized that was a pretty smart aleck response.
Teachers on a power trip is just so frustrating. And teachers, the best thing I can tell you is don't get a big head. Don't think of you're in charge. You do need to be an authority figure, but you also can't let that kind of power go to your head because students are not going to like you, and if they don't like you, they're not going to learn from you, and then you failed to do your job. But also, yeah, I can respect the way that you handled that, though. Just yeah, you know what? You said no talking, so I will not talk. Yeah, if a teacher's going to be hyper strict like that, then use their words against them.
Story 6. In English class, we just finished taking a surprisingly short test. I was one of those gifted, depressed kids that tests well, so I was among the first students done. The test had only been about 5 multiple-choice questions compared to this teacher's usual 15 or so. I announced my surprise by saying, "That was over really quickly." Another student, "That's what she said." My teacher, "Maybe to you." High school was fun. Story 7. This is my favorite story from my AP US history class so far. One of my favorite teachers ever. He pokes fun at the students if they say something stupid, all in good fun, of course. We were reviewing the policies of some founding father presidents, Thomas Jefferson, I think, and he mentioned that they expanded part of the Army and asked us which part it could be, like what branch. Knew it wasn't the Army, same president cut funds for the Army, or the Navy, didn't exist yet, I don't think. And what do I blurt out without thinking? The flipping Air Force in 1800. Was one of those moments where I said it and immediately realized I was an idiot. It took a second for everyone to realize what I said, and we all laughed about it for at least 5 minutes. Teacher made a joke along the lines of, "Today, the Air Force, tomorrow, NASA." I now get called Space Cadet every time I walk into his class wearing some sort of NASA t-shirt.
I love the idea of early 1800s Air Force. Just consists of some carrier pigeons and people seeing what they can tie to different birds. "Ah, have you heard? I believe the French have gathered albatross and are tying very large rocks to them that they can drop." Oh. Early Air Force. I'd join.
Story 8. I once had a friend in 8th grade. It was 5th period reading and he was talking to the person next to him. And as usual, he said the F word nice and loud. The teacher hears this and said, "Watch your language." He then pulled out his Chromebook and pulled up a YouTube video to the English language. The teacher then responds, "What are you doing? We are not to be on our Chromebooks right now. We're supposed to be reading right now." He then responds, "I'm watching my language, just like you said to do." Story 9. I was in college in France and we had a mandatory English class. Most of my classmates weren't really good at it and somewhat uninterested in learning a foreign language, while French translations for my favorite RPG, Always Being Late, pushed me to start English on my own in elementary school, so by that point I was pretty fluent. I remember one time we were talking about the recent events of a journalist who had thrown his shoes at G.W. Bush Jr. The teacher asked if we knew of any other American president who had things thrown at them, probably alluding to the multiple egg throw case throughout history. But my classmates had difficulty understanding, so she rephrased it multiple times and ended up as, "Do you know any other American presidents who took a blow?" I couldn't resist, so I loudly answered, "Bill Clinton," taking the teacher aback for a second before she replied, "No, not that kind of blow, silly." And we had a good laugh about it. All the while, none of my classmates understood what exactly was funny about all that. Story 10. This was between two students, but they were discussing the ethics of concussions in sports. The teacher posed the question, if an athlete gets a concussion, should they be allowed to continue playing? One student argued it's their body, their decision. Another student replied, if they have a concussion, they probably shouldn't be making those decisions.
You know, that's not a bad point, honestly. Like, it is a funny kind of, smart aleck retort. But yeah, if they've had a concussion, maybe don't trust them to do that, because they also might say, I want to take a nap, and you probably shouldn't let them do that, except I think some research says maybe you should, but I don't know. I heard that on the internet, and I trust the internet the appropriate amount.
Story 13. Back in the 3rd grade of elementary school, I was telling jokes to my chairmate. The teacher called me out and said, "Nikki, if you have funny stories to tell, then tell it to the whole class." Of course, she said it in an angry way and was meaning to make me realize that I made a mistake by chatting with a friend while she was explaining something. Little did she know I was in a period where I liked to listen to old comedy podcasts from my father's old cassette tape. I stood up, walked to the front of the class, and started telling the jokes as if it were just another storytelling assignment. Oh, and the best part is my teacher also laughed at my joke. Anger had gone from her face on the 3rd joke.
You called a comedy album on a cassette a podcast, and it's fine, but you've made every person around my age and older watching this just feel that much older. A podcast, I don't think it was a term for a while. Oh God, I don't know how to handle this. I feel very ancient right now. I'm gonna go grab my old. I'm trying to think of an old cassette album that I had, cassette comedy tape I had, like the Jerky Boys or something, but I didn't. I don't know. Podcast. I'm old.
Story 14. I remember rather fondly my friend in maths class being picked on by the teacher as I too happened to notice he was drawing sketches as she was speaking. So noticing this, she abruptly asked, "Blank, what's the derivative of e to the power of x?" He paused, anxiously realizing he was the focus of attention. She again prompted, "Come on, Blank, what is e to the power of x?" To which he then shrugged his shoulders, gave up, and replied in his infamous monotone sarcastic voice something along the lines of, "Well, it's e to the power of x, duh," which just so happened to be the answer. I was dumbfounded and exploding internally with laughter as no one had caught on he was winging it, answered wholly sarcastically in the literal sense. E to the power of x is e to the power of x, and got away with it. Truly a magical moment. Story 15. One time when I was in 5th grade and it was career day, some really nice guy was an engineer and talked about his job for an hour or so. After he was done lecturing, I raised my hand. He pointed to me and I started off saying, "I have a question," and interrupted me jokingly with, "Sorry, but I'm married." Catching the whole class's attention, I sharply say back, "Sorry, but you're not my type." The teacher just burst out laughing as the students were in shock and the guy looked dumbfounded. Best part of 5th grade I ever had. Story 16. I have a bit of a bad habit, sometimes accidentally insulting someone who I should not be disrespecting. My old ELA teacher and I were known to jokingly challenge each other at everything, and occasionally he would ask all the students to come up on the board and draw an example of something. He would always compare my drawing, I was known to be a bit of an artsy kid, to his, and would immediately cross my drawing out first as a joke whenever he was trying to find the best drawn example. One day, I stay a bit later in the classroom after ELA with my friend, and she told my teacher I'm like his daughter. I immediately quit back with, I don't think I'd have the same drawing skills I have now if I were his daughter. The teacher and my friend both burst out laughing, and he jokingly scolded me. That was a fun day.
See, I love this because you have a good rapport going with the teachers, so you can make those jokes with them and have fun. And I mean, I remember the teachers that I had this kind of rapport with. And you want to know what classes I did the best in? Those classes with those teachers, because we got along. I liked them, I respected them, and I engaged with the material more. You could argue that maybe I did because they were teaching material I was more interested in, which was true for some of them, like some English teachers. I was an English major before I dropped out. But I hated math. I was good at math, but I didn't like doing it. It was just uninteresting to me. But the best I ever did in my math class and the most I focused on homework was Algebra 2 with that teacher that I would joke around with and stuff because we had a good rapport. So really kind of speaks to how important that can be and for a teacher to be open to that kind of joking.
Story 17. Once there was a system where healthy students could come to school and sick students would join with Google Meet from their home and we would listen to them on the smartboard. Then, when we were not listening to the teacher and chatting with each other, the teacher suddenly said to the online student, "Hey, I will mute the mic because I'm going to say a bad word." Then she turned to the class and she was like, "Yo, I have punching teens as a hobby." Story 18. Once I was in class and the teacher was telling this kid in a high tone something along the lines of, "You are failing this class." The kid then said that if he goes on a date with her, then can she bring his grade up? The teacher is single, mind you. She replied with, "Bring your grade up, then we talk about the date." The kid hasn't been paying attention ever since because he's scared the teacher may be telling the truth. Story 19. Best one I did in school was by accident. I was in my English class and we were going over Dante's Hell. My teacher was giving us examples on how strict this hell was and how nowadays people would think would go to heaven would end up in this hell. His main example was Batman. When he said the line, "Batman would go to hell," my mouth moved before my mind could register that I was speaking and said, "God damn it." This sent the whole classroom laughing, including the teacher who loved jokes. I remember at first trying to figure out who the hell said that out loud and then trying to die in a hole from embarrassment. Story 20. Not a teacher, but a past student. I was in advanced language arts and my teacher, let's call him Mr. E, was balding. He was a pretty funny, chill guy and he was jokingly scolding a guy named Mason. Mr. E, "Okay, go sit down now." Mason walked over past Mr. E's back and said, "At least I can get a haircut." The whole class, including Mr. E, burst out laughing.
As someone who is follically challenged myself, how dare you? I can get a haircut too. Sometimes I could get multiple hairs cut if I'm lucky. Not too many, but, you know, I'm actually not. I mean, you can see, oh God, it is getting thin. Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
Story 21. Similar to story 16, my French teacher was doing some exercise where we did one-on-one speaking with someone, then switched to someone else when we were done. She kept insisting on calling it the speed dating activity, which we all hated and knew was going to end badly somehow. At the end, she was talking about it and said something about when I was her speed dating partner in front of the whole class, 15 people. I'm a freshman in high school. Story 22. I remember once in my English class, I'm Mexican, a boy who was clowning around with his friend. He was playful, eloquent, but very lazy. Suddenly, the teacher asked him something about the activity we were doing, but he said an unrelated thing in Spanish to top it off. The teacher scolded him and told him to go for a report, but the boy kept questioning and challenging the teacher, and between that, he commented that he would talk to her supervisor. At this point, the teacher was already furious, and that was what broke her patience. So she took him out of the class, all while the boy walked to the exit with the same calm with which he spoke. Once they both got out, the whole class started shouting and praising him. Story 23. Had a teacher well known for being harsher than she should be. On this day, she decided to single out this one boy for not getting his pencil out fast enough. "Teacher, where is your pencil?" Boy, without missing a beat, "Bend over and I'll show you." Half the class choked on their laughter. Story 24. I'm a student, but I have a story. When I was in 4th grade, we had a PE teacher named Mr. Mark. He was always harsh with all the kids at our school. One day, me and my friends Lorelei, Ivy, and Kaveh were at recess decorating our paradise tree with passion fruit vines. We had a club named the Paradise Club, and it was next to the second biggest tree on campus. Then the group of mean kids came over. One of them, Ethan, started pulling all our vines down. We told him to stop, but he just kept going, smiling and laughing. His girlfriend, Lucy, came up to us and said, "This is not your space. We can do what we want." Then she and her bestie, Penelope, started pulling down the vines with Ethan. A student council member that was with them left while she could, which was a smart idea. Cubby and Ethan started swinging sticks at each other. Penelope got hit with one, and I did too. Just then the bell rang, and we all ran to our classrooms, but then Mr. Mark came in. While we were running so we wouldn't be late, he said we were fleeing the scene, and when we tried to tell him what happened, he said he doesn't want to hear the truth. We're all liars at this point. He banned us from touching all planes of grass for the rest of our 4th grade, even though some of us were innocent. That day, I was petrified. I barely ate my lunch. I was very moody. I barely wanted to eat dinner. When my parents heard what happened, they were frigging infuriated. They wrote a strongly worded email to the principal about what happened. The next day, I walked on to the grass freely with no worry. Mr. Mark scolded me, but I said, "Call my mom. She'll agree with me." That day during science, he apologized to me, saying, "You're not a liar. I didn't mean that."
You know, we've all seen this, I think, where a teacher cannot, they weren't witness to a whole event of something bad happening, and so they're just like, then everyone is to blame, which is kind of like the opposite how things work in court, where it's just like, there's no evidence, so everyone's guilty now. Like, what a ludicrous way to go about things. And good on this teacher for getting called out and having to apologize. And also, let's normalize adults having to apologize to kids when they screw up. That's a healthy, good thing to do.
Story 25. Not a teacher, but when in primary school, my friend was mucking around, so the teacher, as she does, says, "Act your age, not your shoe size." His response, simply and calmly, was, "My age is my shoe size." He was a 12-year-old with size 12 shoes, which is bigger than a lot of adults. Story 26. I was once talking mid-lesson in class, but somehow I was able to pay attention. Teacher saw me talking and singled me out to teach me a lesson, and I answered flawlessly. It went from teaching me a lesson to teaching others how I was a good example of how to talk while paying attention. Needless to say, it was a fluke that never happened again. 2 to 3 times, I also caught a ball with one hand while I was looking in the opposite direction like in a movie scene. Later, I got bruises regularly until I eventually gave up on unlocking my full potential. Story 27. Not me, but my sister. She has this literature teacher who was trying to illustrate to his students how small the main character's room was, the size of a mattress. He asked one of the students, "James, how big is your bed?" "Big enough for you and me both." The whole class burst out laughing, and the teacher was flummoxed. Story 28. A similar story with the first one happened to me last year. I was so tired at English class, in my country we speak Spanish, that I just couldn't help it and I fell asleep. A minute or two later, my teacher woke me up and said we had a worksheet to do. I'm not sure if it's called that way, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I grabbed the worksheet, I completed it in like 10 minutes or less. The worksheet even needed an audio that needed to be listened, but I just searched it on YouTube and listened carefully to answer the questions. After I finished, I handed the worksheet to my teacher and went back to sleep without saying anything. When I woke up, the class just ended and my teacher handed back my worksheet and told me that the other students needed the full hour of the class to complete it, and she used my worksheet as a guide to show the other students what to do. I felt so good at that moment. Story 29. Not a teacher, but I was the student on the receiving end of the math teacher trying to scold me because I wasn't doing the problems she was solving on the blackboard, to which I replied, "Of course I'm not doing them, they're wrong." The teacher, stunned, turned towards the blackboard and realized she had made a mistake while solving the problem. The entire class looked at me like I was some sort of god. Now, I wasn't popular in class before this, but I made a bunch of friends after and was on good terms with pretty much everyone in the class.
I do love when you can catch a teacher when they're wrong and it goes well. I have done that. I did it once or twice in my time in school, and it's a great feeling to know that you have bested the teacher, the one who holds all the knowledge, and you're like, "No, you are wrong," and you get him. So good for you. Get 'em!
Story 30. I was a junior in high school. Everyone in my grade level had to go to the auditorium to hear a thing about class rings. My class that I was pulled out of was mixed with people from each grade because it was more of an elective type class. I was the first one of my classroom to get back, and as I entered, the teacher was explaining the notes. He turned and looked at me and goes, "Don't mind us, we're having a brownie and pizza party in here." I responded as I was walking back to my seat, "You're a teacher, you don't have enough money for that." I think he almost cried because on the one hand it was very funny, and on the other hand it stung because it was true. The rest of the class called me very mean. For the record, I did apologize pretty fast after doing it. Story 31. I remember last year we had extra math classes during exam season. The teacher asked us to take out a certain worksheet. He doesn't have this, so I lend him mine since we're sitting at the same desk. There was my friend's number written on it from earlier, so he made a joke. "This sister is trying to get me a number." The whole class laughs. The air asks me why I'm trying to shoot my shot during class in a joking manner. I end up asking him to switch to another desk, and he gets confused why. Story 32. One time a friend of mine was talking mid-class. The teacher heard it and said, "Why are you talking? This will help you in the future." My friend said, "In what exactly?" The teacher got angry and told him to leave the class, and my friend snitched on everyone in class and proceeded to say, "And you know why they're doing this? Because they know it won't be helpful and you're boring." The teacher got really mad and sent him to the principal, but the principal agreed with him. When he told me the principal part, I just cracked out laughing.
Now, to be fair, that, maybe it wasn't a subject that was going to help you in particular, but maybe you're talking distracted someone else. Not your friends talking. Distracted someone else from learning something that was important to their future. Probably not, especially if it was, some class about, civics or stuff like that. I mean, society's going to crumble before you get to use any of that stuff. What, are you going to use it to rebuild it? You're not going to survive the apocalypse. What are you going to offer people? Civics? Nah, the raiders are going to get you.
Story 31. Not a teacher, 5th grade student. At the very start of the year, I had a sub that nobody liked. She was the type of teacher that never listened to what a student has to say and just makes you work without any help. I have a friend who struggles with reading in his head, so when he was reading a social studies assignment that we were doing individually, the sub said, "Friend's name, read in your head." She kept on saying this, and I got tired of her, so I said to her, "You do realize that some people have trouble reading in their head. You're basically telling him to do something that he's not very good at. It's like telling a kid with asthma to stop breathing so hard after he ran a race." She got quiet and everyone was astonished. I told my mom what had happened and she said I was going to be a politician when I'm older, and I can't blame her. Story 32. I'm not a teacher, but my teacher said, "The bell doesn't dismiss you, I do." And then this random kid yells, "Then it doesn't tell me when to get here either." Story 33. I remember one of my math teachers saying, "Don't pack up yet." The word pack and up did not exit my mouth. And I responded with, "Well, they did now." Got the whole class laughing, and the funny part is that she did expect a comedian to call her out, but didn't expect it to be me because I was one of the most behaved students in her class. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.